Welcome back to 535. I'm Leanne Caldwell with Puck News. Today I am talking to a bipartisan duo who is working on permitting reform, as are many members of Congress. But first, today I am joined by California Democrat Scott Peters and Colorado Republican Gabe Evans. You guys are the lead sponsors of the CERT Act, which aims to overhaul and streamline the federal permitting process for energy and infrastructure projects. Let's get into this. Permitting reform, as we were talking about off camera, seems to be the topic du jour these days. Right. Everyone has a permitting reform bill. The House in the spring already passed a narrow permitting reform bill. So first of all, let's just do like 30,000 feet. Can you explain to me and to all the thousands of people out there that are watching, what is the difference between the different permitting reforms? You said there were 4 parts.
Well, let's start with why it's important.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's happening in the United States is we're going to see for the first time an increase in the demand for electricity that we have not seen in a long time, because data centers, onshore manufacturing, electrification, and more air conditioning in the Southwest, we need to build a lot more energy. And what we know about the United States is it takes forever to build stuff. Now, why is that? So we have so much process. The bill that you talked about, the SPEED Act, was a reform of the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires environmental analysis before you make a decision. It's the most litigated federal environmental statute. A lot of litigation comes out of it. So for a big project like a power line, it may take 10 years to do that project, but 7 years is process and litigation. We got to get rid of that. So that's why you want to do permitting reform. So what are the parts of it? One is that reform that the House did already. We've got to reform how we site and plan major transmission lines, which take electrons from Arizona, where they're come out of the sun, to Detroit, where they're used. That's got to happen. The CERT Act would get the administration to stop dragging its foot on renewables, trying to pull plugs on projects it doesn't like, so that every kind of energy has a chance to compete.
How does it do that? How does it force the administration?
Well, first of all, we reinforce that you can't literally pull the plug on something like the Revolution Wind project, the offshore wind project that was under construction, that the Trump administration tried to say was a national security threat, pulled the permits.
So any project that is already through the process, right, you just can't kill.
And also, you can't drag your feet on permitting projects. Now, we put timelines on the actual the permitting of, say, a wind project on federal land. Mm-hmm. Right now, supposedly Secretary Burgum's got to sign off on all 69 steps of that. That can't work.
Okay.
We get rid of that. And then there's also an effort, I think the fourth part of it is, there's an effort to do pipeline reform under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, which basically allows...
Oil and gas pipeline?
Gas pipeline. Basically allows a governor to say there's a clean water issue and stop a pipeline. And people think on the oil and gas industry that's been abused. I would just say, from a climate perspective, the reason I care about this is that we have to make all energy go faster. 90% of the power that wants to be built in the United States that's lined up to be approved is non-emitting renewables. Mm-hmm. And so if we want to really transition away from dirtier fuel to cleaner fuel, permitting reform is a big part of that. We got to get out of the way.
Okay, so Congressman Evans, we talked about how the House has already passed the NEPA provisions of it to reform that, to make it process to go through the environmental standards. So can you talk specifically, Congressman Peters talked about the CERT Act. Is that specifically what your joint bill would do, or is there more to it?
Yes, there's actually more to it. Permitting reform is such a broad topic in the House. There's 3 major committees that have jurisdiction, and then there's bits and pieces and random other committees as well. So Scott and I both sit on the Energy and Commerce Committee. We have jurisdiction over things like the EPA, but then you have the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. They have a lot of jurisdiction over linear assets like roads. They have some jurisdiction over pipeline as well. And then you have the Natural Resources Committee, and that's where NEPA lives. And so the first thing that Scott and I did was we put together this bipartisan permitting reform framework just because no one single bill is going to fix this, just because the bureaucracy around building things in the United States is so broad. Even in Congress, it falls into multiple different committees, and you have multiple different laws: clean air, clean water, NEPA, endangered species. There's so many different things that all intersect over what we colloquially call permitting reform, that makes it more difficult to build things. So the first thing was this bipartisan permitting reform framework. Here are the general things where Republicans and Democrats, we think, can agree to try to move the needle in terms of being able to responsibly build major infrastructure projects faster. And then from that, you get NEPA, talking about how do we reduce the years of litigation for projects. The statistic we were briefed was a major infrastructure project. If it gets sued under NEPA, 80% of the time that project is going to be approved as is. They did the paperwork right the first time. It's just going to take years of litigation to get there. So how do we cut out a lot of that just unnecessary litigation? If 80% of these projects get approved correctly the first time, how do we make that? We want people to have their say. Well, we don't want, as Scott said, projects to be dragged out for 7 years in litigation. Then there's the CERT Act. So my district, Colorado 8, 4% of U.S. crude oil comes out of my district, but 1 in 2 wind generators in the nation are also built in my district. So for me, it doesn't matter whether it's the Biden administration canceling the Keystone Pipeline or some of the hurdles that we're now facing with the deployment of wind projects. If someone goes through all of the effort to jump through all of the different hoops to get a federal permit to build some of these big infrastructure projects that we need, we want to make sure that that permit is durable across administrations. Otherwise, industry and investors, they're never going to be able to invest in a project longer than 4 years at a time if they don't know that their federal permit is going to be durable. And again, this applies to Keystone Pipeline, oil and gas, or wind. We want a level playing field for all safe, affordable, and reliable energy. And the CERT Act is one of the ways that we do that, by making sure that those permits are depoliticized. If you get your federal permit, it's going to be durable across administrations.
Would you guys say when the issues around permitting reform for several years now have been which types of projects you are approved? During the Biden administration, they tried to do permitting reform at the very end of that administration. It fell apart. There was a lot of disagreement on, if it should prioritize oil and gas or solar, renewables. Now that there's a lot more pressure on the country with energy costs, energy need and demand, are those walls starting to come down among both of your colleagues? You're a Republican and you're a Democrat. Are you seeing it more broadly that people are more supportive of an all of the above strategy, and is it enough?
I think so. I mean, as a Democrat, I'm really proud to have voted for the IRA, which was to be the largest down payment on climate action in the history of the world. But I'm embarrassed about how little of it got done because we have so much process. And instead of taking advantage of that moment and getting rid of the process so we could actually take that money out of the bank and put it into the ground and help facilitate a transition to cleaner, it sat in the bank and we lost that opportunity. And now I think we're at a moment where the market, as I said, is bringing us renewables. If you look at what's happening in China, huge amounts of solar. Texas, not known for being a climate hub of climate activity or concern, oil and gas, they're now the biggest producer of solar or wind, and they will be the biggest producer of solar because it makes sense. The market is bringing us that. So I think now an all of the above strategy on the natural works to the benefit of climate advocates like me. It also helps lower costs because the more energy we have to meet the demand, the better chance we'll have to keep costs low. And so now's a time when all of the above makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, what about you as a Republican? What are you seeing from your colleagues? Are people more accepting more often this all above strategy?
I think they are, and I think from the Republican side, what we're seeing is this growing understanding that we're not in a vacuum here in the United States. Just because we don't do something doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It will happen. It's just going to happen in other places like China. And you go look at the carbon footprint that some of our foreign competitors like China produce to make the same equivalent unit of whatever. The fact of the matter is China pollutes orders of magnitude more than the United States does oftentimes to be able to produce the same thing. So if we want to protect the environment, We have to build it here in the United States, and we have to have that all-of-the-above approach as long as it's safe, affordable, and reliable to be able to meet that demand. The number that we continually hear is somewhere around 170 gigawatts. So translating that into normal speak, that's 50 million households worth of energy. And that's what we're going to need in the next 3.5 years.
Yeah.
A natural gas turbine is backlogged due to supply chain issues right now, which also ties into permitting reform. How do we build more things faster? But those are backlogged several years. So we have to have solar. You can get that on the grid in 11 months. Wind, 18 months. We know we need baseload dispatchable energy because on the hottest days and the coldest days, typically the sun isn't shining, the wind's not blowing. And so we have to have baseload dispatchable energy to be able to tide us through those times where sun's not shining, wind's not blowing. And so we really need all of the above energy as long as it meets those three criteria: safe, affordable, reliable, and being able to build that supply chain, being able to build that infrastructure that's what permitting reform is all about. How do we do it responsibly but faster?
Congressman Peters, let's talk about the environmental impact of this.
Yeah.
We were talking about environmental litigators and
Right.
how it could take years to get a project to go through. What is the right balance? Should the environmental implications be taken into consideration at all when the country needs more energy?
Of course, I think absolutely. The point I'm trying to make is what wants to get built, 90% of the gigawatts in line to get built are renewables. So if you think in the broad sense about what's really good for the environment, it's getting out of the way. It's doing permit reform to get those electrons generated in that way. That just makes sense for the environment. Now, if you're saying, we'll have fewer community meetings, less litigation, I don't think that's really played out in a way that's helped the environment as much as getting out of the way of the development of these renewables will. So I think we sometimes mistake the planning law that NEPA is for environmental protection. We have the Clean Water Act, we have the Clean Air Act. Those are the substantive protections against the emission of pollutants in the environment. I think we have a lot of room to be more flexible about NEPA when we need so much more energy and so much of what wants to get built is clean. That's what's good for the environment.
Congressman Evans, what about you? How much should the environment be taken into consideration? And is the NEPA reform about scaling back so that it is just clean air and clean water, those laws that are being considered when these environmental protection assessments are done?
I think the Supreme Court phrased it best in their unanimous decision, the 7 counties decision, which was a case in between Colorado and Utah. We're speaking specifically to NEPA. They said the point of this law is to inform, not paralyze. And unfortunately, where we're at right now, as Scott has said, is we're paralyzed. It takes years to decades to build the most simple infrastructure. In Colorado, we know we're in the middle of a historic drought, and we know it's very dry anyway. Somewhere around 10 to 12 inches of rain a year along Colorado's Front Range. Several million people live there. So water storage is important. We have a dam, a reservoir for water storage for the Denver metro area, existing dam in an existing mountain valley. And that project has been under litigation for 2 decades just to raise the height of the dam. We're not creating a new dam, we're not flooding out any new areas here. We're just making the water go a little bit higher up on the walls of an existing canyon. And for 2 decades, drinking water has been under litigation along the Colorado Front Range. So of course we want to take care of the environment. We need to inform, as the Supreme Court said, but we can't paralyze this because we need water, we need the infrastructure, and again, if we're truly concerned about the environment, we've got to do it here in the United States. I spent 12 years in the US Army. I've been to the Middle East. I've seen how the rest of the world produces energy. And if we're not producing energy here, CBS just did a big story about how the west coast of the United States gets a lot of their energy from the Middle East that then gets refined in East Asia and then gets shipped across the Pacific Ocean to California and the rest of the west coast. Not my conclusion, this was CBS's conclusion. That actually increases the carbon emissions and the carbon footprint if we have to go buy energy from the Middle East, refine it in East Asia, and ship it to the West Coast. Let's just make it here.
Yeah.
We do it cleaner, we do it better, we do it more environmentally and socially responsible. Permitting reform is how we do it responsibly, but we don't gum it up in litigation or process for years to decades.
Yeah, really quickly, Congressman Peters, this Congress is almost done.
Yeah.
We are entering an election. What are the chances, what gossip are you hearing from the Senate that this could potentially be done this year?
I hear the Senate's having really good conversations. They know this is our moment. We've got really good work lined up around all the components of this permit reform. We just need to get them in a room, sign it up, make it into a bill, and I think we got a really good chance this time.
Okay, how's your optimism?
I'm optimistic. I'm hearing the exact same thing, both, obviously here in Congress, but also in my previous life as a state legislator. I've always been a House guy, and so I'm used to waiting on the Senate and trying to read the tea leaves and see what's the Senate going to do. But I share the optimism. I think that we're going to get something meaningful delivered and then across the finish line, because we have to do it. This is a matter of national concern. If we don't have the energy and the resources here, we're going to lose ground to China.
And it'll help the environment and help affordability.
Great. Congressman Gabe Evans, thank you so much. Congressman Scott Peters, your second appearance on 535.
I love it here. This is a really comfortable chair. Thank you.
Both of you should come back. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks
Leanne.
And we will be right back with more policy-focused conversations.